Florida is collapsing. Not slowly, not metaphorically. Right now, the ground beneath the state is giving way. In January 2010, farmers in a place called Plant City made a desperate choice. For 11 days, they pumped water without stopping, spraying their strawberry fields to save them from a catastrophic freeze. The pumps ran day and night, pulling millions of gallons from the earth. They saved the crops, but in the process, they dropped the local water table by 60 feet, and the land beneath their feet began to disintegrate. 140 sinkholes opened up. The porous limestone that holds up the entire state, suddenly drained of the water pressure holding it together, simply caved in. It wasn't a slow sag, it was a violent structural failure. Florida is built on a pressurized sponge of ancient water, and for 11 days, in a panic to save some fruit, a small corner of the state proved what happens when you drain that sponge too fast. The state itself begins to vanish. That event was a warning, a preview, because what happened in Plant City over 11 days is now happening across Florida over years. So let me pose the question from the outset. Which part of Florida runs out of water first? Is it the sprawling heart of the state, Central Florida, which is projected to face a daily water deficit of 96 million gallons? Or is it the coastal fortress of South Florida, where the ocean itself is pushing inland, turning the drinking water for millions of people to salt? Let me know in the comments which scenario you think is more urgent, the countdown or the contamination. We are finding that a huge number of people watch these reports, but many forget to subscribe. If this kind of analysis is vital to you, take 1 second and click that button. It's the only way to be certain you get the next report when it drops, and what's happening in Florida is a story that cannot be missed. Let's begin. The great paradox of Florida is the illusion of abundance. It is a state that looks, feels, and smells permanently wet. It gets between 50 and 55 inches of rainfall every year. It is surrounded on 3 sides by the ocean. It is famous for its swamps, its rivers, its afternoon thunderstorms that arrive with tropical certainty. By every visible metric, this should be the last place in America to ever worry about a water crisis. And yet, it is a state on the verge of running dry. Here is the number that exposes the illusion. Of those 50-plus inches of rain, only about 13 inches ever make it back into the ground to recharge the aquifer. The rest evaporates under a relentless sun, is sucked up by plants, or, in the state's sprawling cities, hits a hard surface. It strikes pavement, rooftops, and concrete drainage canals, and it is immediately shot out into the ocean. Wasted. Gone. Every new subdivision, every new shopping mall, every new highway is another patch of Florida that can no longer drink the rain that falls on it. This is a state that is systematically starving its own water supply. Beneath the surface sits one of the most productive groundwater systems on planet Earth, the Florida Aquifer. It's not a lake, it is not an underground river. It is a 100,000 square mile subterranean world of porous, sponge-like limestone that stretches from South Carolina through Georgia and Alabama and under the entire peninsula of Florida. A geological formation of tertiary carbonate rock holding trillions of gallons of rainwater filtered and stored over millions of years. A USGS geologist named Victor Timothy Stringfield was the first to truly map it, back in 1936. Before then, people knew the water was there. They drilled wells and it gushed out, sometimes under its own artesian pressure. But Stringfield gave it a name and a boundary. He defined the unseen ocean that the state's future would be built upon. And that is exactly what happened. Nearly 90% of all drinking water for the state's 21 million residents comes from this single, vast, underground system. It supports roughly 10 million people in total. The entire modern state of Florida, its cities, its agriculture, its economy, exists because V.T. Stringfield was right. The water was there. It seemed limitless. It was not limitless. It never was. And more than 70 years ago, one corner of the state learned that lesson firsthand. If you drive to Polk County today, near the town of Bartow, you can find a quiet, unremarkable ditch. It is dry, overgrown, forgotten. But this ditch used to be one of the most famous places in Central Florida. It was called Kissingen Spring, and in the 1920s and 30s, it was spectacular. It wasn't just a spring, it was a destination. A massive pool of crystal-clear water boiling up from the Florida Aquifer, feeding a swimming area complete with a high dive, a pavilion, and a dance floor. Historic photographs show hundreds of people enjoying water that gushed from the earth at a rate of 20 million gallons a day. It was the physical manifestation of Florida's seemingly infinite water supply, a fountain of youth that people thought could never be turned off. Then, people started drilling wells, lots of them, for new cities, for phosphate mining, for agriculture. Each well was a small straw into the same aquifer that fed the spring, and each straw pulled water away. The pressure began to drop. The gushing flow of Kissingen Spring began to slow, first to a boil, then to a simmer, then to a quiet weep. On February 19, 1950, it stopped, completely. The tourists left. The dance floor rotted. The high dive was torn down. Kissingen Spring became the first major spring in Florida to be pumped to death by human consumption. It wasn't killed by a drought. It was killed by progress, by a few thousand wells taking just a little bit more than the system could sustain. It wasn't just a spring. It was a prophecy written in dry dirt. A warning of what happens when a region starts drinking its geological savings account. A warning that went almost entirely ignored. Today, the ghost of Kissingen Spring is no longer just a local story. It is the blueprint for a statewide catastrophe. Look at the numbers coming out of Central Florida. The Orlando region, home to theme parks, explosive growth, and millions of residents, is actively running out of water. This isn't a future projection. It is a present-day mathematical certainty. The Central Florida Water Initiative, or CFWI, is a collaborative body made up of the state's most powerful water management agencies: the SFWMD, the SWFWMD, the SJRWMD. These are not environmental groups. These are the sober, bureaucratic agencies responsible for keeping the taps on. And their official projection is a groundwater shortfall of 96 million gallons per day by the year 2045. Not a temporary shortage, a permanent, structural deficit. Every single day, the region will need 96 million gallons more than the aquifer can sustainably provide. That is the water needed for nearly 1 million people. Gone. The reason is simple: more straws in the ground. Florida's population has been exploding for 50 years, historically gaining over 1,000 new residents a day. The state is projected to swell from 21 million people today to nearly 33.7 million by the year 2070. And a huge portion of that growth is happening squarely in the CFWI region, the area that is already in a declared water deficit. It is a simple math problem. More people, more houses, more businesses, all drawing from the same finite source that is already showing signs of exhaustion. The aquifer that took millions of years to fill is being drawn down in decades. This is a quantity crisis, a countdown to zero. The tank is emptying faster than the rain can refill it. And right as the alarms are reaching their peak volume, a new and profoundly thirsty industry has arrived: artificial intelligence. In 2024 and 2026, proposals began surfacing to build massive AI data centers across Florida, with a particular focus on the same vulnerable regions like Polk County, where Kissingen Spring once flowed. These are not normal office buildings. They are water-guzzling factories of computation. The servers inside generate so much heat that they require millions of gallons of water per day for cooling, running it through evaporative towers that release it into the atmosphere as steam. One data center can use as much water as an entire town. Environmental groups and hydrologists have been sounding the alarm with increasing desperation. To them, building AI data centers in a region with a known water deficit is like building a fireworks factory next to a gas leak. It is an act of profound, almost suicidal negligence. You cannot solve a 96 million gallon deficit by inviting an industry that measures its daily water consumption in the millions of gallons. The debate is raging right now. Should a state facing a water crisis allow this kind of development? The question pits Florida's economic model, which is built on relentless growth, against its geological reality, which is built on finite limits. What do you think? Should a state with a declared water deficit allow industries that consume millions of gallons a day? The debate is happening right now in places like Polk County. Drop your thoughts below. The water managers know the numbers don't add up. They know the proposals are unsustainable. But the pressure to grow, to bring in tech jobs, to be the next Silicon Valley, is immense. So, while Central Florida counts down to a specific, calculated shortfall, the southern half of the state is fighting a completely different kind of war. It's not about quantity. It's about quality. South Florida runs on a separate, shallower aquifer called the Biscayne Aquifer. It is a wedge of highly permeable limestone that sits just below the surface, underlying the 4,000 square miles of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. It is the sole source of drinking water for over 3 million people. For the 2.5 million residents of Miami-Dade County, there is no backup. There is no other pipe. There is no alternative. Everything depends on the Biscayne, and the Biscayne is being poisoned by the sea. The problem is called saltwater intrusion, and to understand it, you have to stop thinking of the aquifer as a container. It's a pressurized system. For thousands of years, fresh water flowing down from the Everglades has filled the porous limestone, creating a zone of high pressure that pushes outward, holding the dense, heavy saltwater of the Atlantic Ocean at bay. The fresh water forms a kind of underground wall, preventing the ocean from seeping inland through the same porous rock. But for the last century, South Florida has been relentlessly drilling into that pressurized system, pumping out billions of gallons of fresh water for its cities and farms. Every gallon removed lowers the freshwater pressure, and as that pressure drops, the heavier ocean saltwater starts to win the underground battle. It begins to creep inland, advancing slowly, invisibly, through the limestone, contaminating the aquifer from below. Once a section of the aquifer is contaminated with salt, it is permanent. The wells in that zone are ruined forever. You cannot flush it out. You cannot reverse it. The freshwater source is lost. And it's happening right now, at a rate that scientists are calling deeply alarming. A United States Geological Survey report published in late 2025 documented the advance. Between 2018 and 2022, in just 4 years, the saltwater interface at the base of the Biscayne Aquifer had pushed as much as 0.8 kilometers inland in some areas. Nearly half a mile, an invisible army of salt, marching inland, claiming territory that was once pure, fresh water. As of 2011, an area of approximately 1,200 square kilometers of the aquifer was already considered lost to saltwater. The new data shows the invasion is accelerating. This is the reality on the ground. It's complex, it's urgent, and most people have no idea it's happening. If you think this information needs to be seen, share this report with your family. And if you're getting value from this, a simple like on the video helps more than you know. And I know I've said it before, but it's crucial. Please subscribe. A shocking number of viewers haven't, and you'll miss the follow-up on this if you don't. It's that important. The health of the Biscayne Aquifer is directly and inextricably linked to one place, the Everglades. For generations, the water coming out of a tap in Miami was, quite literally, yesterday's swamp water. Rain would fall on the vast wetlands, seep into the ground, and flow slowly southeast through the limestone, recharging the aquifer beneath the city. But a century ago, Florida decided to drain the swamp. A massive network of canals was dug to dry out land for farming and development. Those canals saved Miami from flooding, but they also did something else. They became superhighways, carrying billions of gallons of precious freshwater directly out to sea, bypassing the aquifer entirely. And now, as sea levels rise, those same canals are acting as conduits, allowing saltwater to push deeper inland at the surface, while the saltwater front advances underground. South Florida is being besieged on two fronts, from below and from the side. Dr. Todd A. Crowell, the executive director of the Institute of Environment at Florida International University, is one of the leading scientists studying this. His assessment is blunt. If we just keep going the way we are going now, we are likely to be in trouble in the not-too-distant future, he says. It's just a simple pressure problem. Watching the rate that's happening is a little bit scary. Scary is the right word, because in the spring of 2026, the entire system was pushed to its breaking point. The drought that hit Florida in early 2026 was unprecedented in the modern record. For the first time in 25 years, 100% of the state was under official drought conditions. All 5 of the state's water management districts issued simultaneous warnings. It was a statewide emergency. In South Florida, the impact was immediate. The Biscayne Aquifer, already stressed and overpumped, dropped to the lower 10th percentile of its historic levels. The freshwater pressure plummeted, creating the exact conditions for a rapid, potentially catastrophic advance of the saltwater front toward Miami's most critical coastal well fields. The crisis wasn't theoretical. It was real enough that on the other side of the state, in places like Citrus County, authorities enacted a modified Phase 3 extreme water shortage order. Effective April 3, 2026, residents were legally restricted to watering their lawns just 1 day per week. Violators faced strict fines. The mandate was a direct response to a regional rainfall deficit that had exceeded 13 inches. It was a tangible sign that the system had no more give. Florida had entered a new era, the era of limits, an era where the illusion of abundance finally shattered against the hard reality of geology and consumption. So what is the solution? When confronted with a crisis this severe, the conversation inevitably turns to technology, to engineering. The most common proposal is desalination. If you are surrounded by oceans, why not just drink the ocean water? It is a seductive idea. It is also deeply flawed. Desalination, typically through a process called reverse osmosis, is massively energy intensive. It requires forcing salt water through fine membranes at extremely high pressure, a process that consumes enormous amounts of electricity. That makes the water incredibly expensive, far more so than pumping it from the ground. Then there is the problem of what is left over. For every gallon of fresh water produced, you get a gallon of super concentrated toxic brine. Disposing of this brine is an environmental nightmare. Dump it back in the ocean, and it creates dead zones, killing marine life. Desalination is not a silver bullet. It is an expensive, energy-hogging, last-resort measure for wealthy desert nations, not a scalable solution for a state of 21 million people. The other solution is conservation. And Florida is trying. But it is fighting against its own economic DNA. The entire state is a growth machine, predicated on selling a dream of sunshine and easy living to a constant influx of new residents. As the water policy expert Robert Glennon, author of Unquenchable, puts it, the supply is finite, but the access to it is not finite. It's limitless. His point is that Florida has never put a meaningful price on its groundwater, or a limit on who can access it. As long as you can drill a well, the water is effectively yours for the taking. This is the core contradiction. A state whose survival depends on restraint is run by an economy that demands infinite expansion. The state's 5 water management districts are now caught in this impossible bind. They are tasked with planning for a sustainable future while operating in a political and economic system that actively undermines it. They are drawing up plans for alternative water supplies, like treating and reusing wastewater, or capturing more stormwater. But these projects are expensive, politically difficult, and decades away from making a significant impact. Meanwhile, the population keeps growing. The wells keep pumping, and the 2 clocks keep ticking. So we return to the central question: who will run out of water first? The case for Central Florida is a case of simple, brutal arithmetic. The 96 million gallon daily deficit is not a guess. It is a calculation based on projected growth and known hydrological limits. Barring a sudden and dramatic halt to development, or the immediate discovery of a magical new water source, this deficit will arrive. It will mean severe, permanent restrictions. It could mean moratoriums on new construction. It will fundamentally change the economic trajectory of the entire region. The arrival of water-hungry data centers only accelerates that timeline, turning a 2045 problem into a potential 2035 crisis. The end for Central Florida looks like a spreadsheet. A day when the demand number definitively and permanently exceeds the supply number. The case for South Florida is less about a countdown and more about a sudden cardiac event. The advance of the saltwater front is a creeping threat, but it is vulnerable to shocks. A severe multi-year drought like the one that just hit could dramatically accelerate the intrusion. A major hurricane, pushing a massive storm surge up the canals and into the coastal wetlands, could contaminate huge areas of the aquifer in a matter of days. The end for South Florida doesn't look like a spreadsheet. It looks like a person turning on their tap in Miami and the water tasting faintly of salt. And then one day, not so faintly, when that happens, the well fields are lost. For good. It is a choice between 2 different kinds of failure. A slow, managed decline into scarcity, or a sudden, catastrophic poisoning. Okay, last time, I promise. But if you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who needs to be subscribed. We need informed people paying attention to this. Hit the button. It matters. Florida's water crisis is not a story about a lack of rain. It is a story about a lack of foresight. It is the story of a state that built a 21st century civilization on top of a water system it treats like an infinite resource from a bygone era. The engineers know, the scientists know, the water managers know. They have seen the numbers. They have mapped the advancing salt. They have watched the spring systems flicker and die. The warning signs are no longer subtle. They are sinkholes 60 feet deep. They are emergency water restrictions in the middle of the water state. They are the dry, dusty bed of a place that once roared with 20 million gallons of fresh water every single day. The ghost of Kissingen Spring